So the most important fact of the 21st century, I believe, is that every individual for the first time in history can collaborate potentially with any other individual on the planet without an intermediary. Governments, nation states, anything based on geography is always partly based on the limitations that geography placed on us. We have nation states. We had the Kingdom of France because your neighbor, your geographical fellows, those are your natural constituency to cooperate with. Obviously, if you were living in Gaul in 300 AD, or to keep the metaphor better, in 600 AD after the Roman Empire fell, you had no communication around the world. Now that was the central fact of existence or of human civilization for the entirety of our history. That started to break down, obviously, with the telegraph and other means of, quick and fairly reliable communication starting in the 19th century, British Empire and all that. But only recently, in a relatively and historically short period of time, the last couple decades, has this mechanism whereby anyone who doesn't happen to work for the British Empire or doesn't happen to be a CEO with a lot of resources can now collaborate with anyone else. And that is something that is so fundamentally different from the basis of prior human civilization that it's very hard to understand what that means, especially given that the internet, it has certain associations. It has a lot of silly associations. Obviously, it's given rise to a lot of amusing things. And whenever that's the case, it makes it hard to take seriously. But it is a very profound and it is a development that is full of vast potential. And if it hasn't exhibited that potential yet, it's largely because we ourselves have not yet taken full advantage of it. I believe that we have not come close to the point we will be at some point of turning the internet into what it could be in terms of human collaboration. Right now, a couple decades into the information age, you still have applications, social networks that have been designed sort of haphazardly and generally not viewed as what they are. What they are is a radical departure from the limitations that were upon us prior to this. What they are is the means whereby people scattered across the globe with similar values and similar objectives can become formidable entities in their own right. In some ways, having advantages over even larger but less dynamic institutions. If you solve the problem, at least in part, of how to expedite this collaboration, if you get people into a place both mentally and intellectually where they recognize that, yes, there is a great deal that we can do, and it's right that we do it, and it's our duty to do it. If you get that across, then you'll see a catalyst. You'll see a massive change in which it suddenly becomes not so much an early adapter thing or an eccentric or silly thing to be involved in a cyber-based polity, a civics that is apart from the brick and mortar traditional civics. Right now, it doesn't seem silly to a lot of people to hold allegiance to a geographical nation state because it's very common. It is the rule rather than the exception. But that can be changed very quickly. And so those who think that, hey, maybe there won't be big, profound changes in the next several decades from the internet, and maybe there will not arise a number of superior, more dynamic polities capable of circling and outdoing the nation states that exist today. That's an error. It's an error derived from the fact that these things haven't happened yet. And it's sometimes hard to envision others doing them as well. Even if you yourself say, oh, it'd be great, it'd be a fine idea if we got together using some superior platform that harnessed our skills and put us in efficient working relationships with others around the globe on a large scale. That'd be great, but who's going to do that? obviously you always start at that point, and there's a process when you get from the point at which you can get eccentrics and early adapters and just that sort of person to use this. There's a point from there to when you start to get mainstream people who are identified publicly as mainstream, and they start to use it and they accept it, and gradually, obviously, as with all new things, it will become the rule eventually. I don't believe that the nation state will be replaced by these kinds of entities like the ones that we're trying to build, the Pursuance system. I do believe that they will grow in stature. They will grow in terms of how many people are members of them around the world. They will grow in terms of something with which to identify, just as much as people identify with flags and ethnic groups and what have you today. There's absolutely no reason whatsoever that something like Pursuance or any kind of entity that anyone creates that people join and accept and consider to be their new civics, their polity, above their nation. That's the kind of thing that will lead to conflict with nation states. They will be competitors in many cases. In some cases, they won't. In some cases, you'll have these entities that are being run by these ultra-nationalists to conduct their business of securing their nationalism, which can take many forms, unfortunately. There will be bad entities that I would not like and that you would not like, but they will exist. And so I think it's important that the people who start this and who get a lead on it and who put their focus into it should be people who support open, free, and just societies, not nationalists, not fascists, not conservatives. They should be an array of left-wingers, libertarians, anarchists, moderate Democrats who are not hugely partisan, certain kinds of conservatives, people who respect the rights of others at the very least, and who have certain shared values along those lines. People who oppose the police state as they see it, people who oppose mass surveillance, people who oppose hypernationalism, and people who respect the rights of others in general. Within that framework, they can obviously disagree and will disagree on a number of things. They'll disagree on what capitalism is and whether it's the opponent. They'll disagree about socialism. They'll disagree on a number of issues within that, but they will have a solid framework on which to collaborate. Now, in the Pursuance system, which we've made a couple videos on, and we have a presentation on our website at pursuanceproject.org, even within that system, everyone is free to create their own entity, their own pursuance, or to apply to join other pursuances. Everyone is free to create an entity and develop it however they like. They can delegate a great deal of power to others. They can keep the power and just delegate work. And those people who are willing to work in those circumstances because they trust that person can do that. But there will not be any confusion as to where anyone's rights or responsibilities derive from. Now, that's in contrast to, say, a movement starts to develop. And the movement kind of derives just kind of as an outgrowth of events. And people join together and they march, and then people create websites with slogans, and they all kind of agree that they're in that movement. But within that framework, there is no fully just way of determining who's in charge. And so as an alternative to that, a lot of movements aspire to the prospect of having no one in charge, or at least paying lip service to that and saying we're all equal, blah, blah, there's no leaders here. And that can work. The problem is that many times, in many cases, including ones that I've observed very closely, there does become a structure of leadership. And that structure, having sort of emerged as they normally do, is not necessarily just or efficient. And so this is an alternative to those more haphazard ways of collaborating with anonymous and with a lot of groups that were less known and probably less sordid and salacious than anonymous with all of its hacking and whatnot. The IRC networks that some people would maintain and oversee serve as organizing grounds. And because the IRC network, having control of that, also meant that you could ban people or keep people out, or simply that you had this inherent status by virtue of having a little ampersand next to your name, meaning you're a channel operator, that did create a overclass, an arbitrary overclass. that had the advantage of pretending it didn't exist. In other cases, including some that actually worked out very well, there was a secret ruling class with Anonymous and Chanology. The operation against Scientology that began in 2008, you had a secret room in a server. The server was previously used for just silly anonymous prank stuff, was sort of co-opted to serve as an organizing platform for the movement against Scientology. And this small set of people who had created the video, which got hundreds of thousands of views in the next few days after it was created, they also maintained a secret sort of working arrangements whereby they oversaw the server. They created a number of channels for people of different regions to go into and organize, but then they selected essentially we might call soft leaders for each server who dealt with them directly and kind of presented the next steps as they saw them being necessary to their channels, to the other people in their region, as if they had not come from this secret directorate. That was the way they chose to do it, because had they said, oh, we're the leaders directly, you're going to have a lot of pushback against that for good reasons and also for bad reasons. No one wants to believe that they are, given the choice between believing that one is a equal partner in some great thing and believing that one is perhaps less important than others. There's a number of people who are going to want to believe the former. But at any rate, that was not a perfect solution to that problem. And it was a problem because if there were not this secret directorate, influencing things behind the scenes and coordinating things and also dealing with experts who could come to them and advise them on certain matters, it would not have gone nearly as well. So we want to avoid all of that. We want to create something whereby that's not necessary, whereby everything is open, above board. You know exactly what kind of group you're getting into, what your rights are as a member of that group. We want to build a platform around free association rather than voting. Of course, within a pursuance, you can have a democratic setup where you do vote on things. You can also have one in which that's partly the case, in which there is a portion of the pursuance or a portion of its activities that are up for a vote. But the default pursuance, for reasons that we've thought long and hard over, is something more top-down by default, in which someone is going to create a pursuance, create an objective, recruit people for that objective, delegate powers to some extent, but ultimately maintain control over the bulk of over the broad thrust of what it does. But again, there will be pursuances that are totally democratic, in which one person creates a pursuance and immediately delegates power to others. Here's my wonderful dry erase board that I acquired recently, that I've used in some of these past videos explaining the basics. And as you can see, there's different sorts of pursuances to be created. There are pursuances in which one person creates it and is connected straight to the pursuance box, as I call it, temporarily until we think of a better term, and thus controls the growth of the pursuance, and is the only one. That person can delegate power down the line and bring on B here and allow B to bring on whoever they want and run however their operations need to be as B chooses. And then they'll have any number of options aside from that on how to delegate power. You can also have a pursuance like over here, in which a person is created and then immediately delegated power, mostly equal power, to a couple of other people. You have a sort of an oligarchy here, and in which each of those people, together vote on major actions, or in which they don't vote, but there's no mechanism for that, but they just each have their own protocol going on, and they're bringing on people under them however they choose. There's any number of ways to do this. It's a wonderful framework for experimentation because it makes it so easy. Obviously, in real life, you don't have access to hundreds and hundreds of people who are of your same general mindset and who want to act and who have some expertise in some particular field. Here you do. Obviously, in real life, it can be difficult to arrange a group efficiently that can, act dynamically and grow in a way that will not necessarily weigh it down. there's any number of barriers in real brick and mortar life to starting a group. So to give you a real world example, had the internet not existed, back when I was 26 or 27 and I wanted to create Project PM, it would be much more difficult for me. But things being as the case, I was able to, because I was a writer, I was able to recruit people online via my columns in Huffington Post and Skeptical Inquirer and blah, blah, and put out this kind of unusual idea that, hey, I'm this guy and I'm creating this thing, which is very ambitious. And, obviously you have to be of a certain adventurous, you have to have a certain element of interest to you to join this thing because it's so bizarre and unusual. But there'll always be some portion that will join it. And so I was able to put out the word and get something going in which we had some pretty square people. As a compliment, we had a former IRS attorney as my sort of second in command when we were building Project PM, the original Project PM, which was intended to create this very similar thing what we're building now, before it turned into a crowdsourced investigation into these intelligence contractors via Anonymous. But that was the thing that became possible to do that. Someone who at the time was a heroin addict living on my ship of friends here. I'm going to cut this short. I don't see any questions. To be continued.